Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to The City Imagines, Writers and the Climate Crisis, hosted by The Word on the Street Toronto. I'm David Alexander, and I'll be your host this evening. The Word on the Street is a festival of books, ideas, and imagination, but we're more than a festival. Watts is a community. After moving our festival online last fall, we were extremely excited for tonight's event, which might just be our first ever January event. It's also the beginning of Season 2 of The City Imagines, our series. It will be proceeding monthly from here on out, and we hope that you'll join us each month for upcoming events in the series. Before I invite our moderator onto the broadcast, I'd like to acknowledge that The Word on the Street Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Takaranto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples with long histories on this land. We are privileged to live, work, and create in this territory and strive to act with awareness and solidarity. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy, wherever you're tuning in from. In February, the City Imagines will return for a special feature conversation on the Toronto Book of Love with author Adam Bunch and gossip maven Lainey Louis. You can find more details about this event at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. But without further ado, please welcome Kathryn Mockler. Kathryn edited the print anthology, Watch Your Head, Writers and Artists Respond to the Climate Crisis, published last year by Coach House Books, and is the publisher of the Watch Your Head website. Her debut collection of stories is forthcoming from Book Hug in 2023, and she's also an assistant professor of screenwriting at the University of Victoria. Kathryn, hello.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having us. We're really grateful for the opportunity.
Well, we're excited to address this important topic. And before I bring on and let you start your discussion with Carleigh Baker, Simone Dalton, Christine Leclerc, and Carrianne Leung, I wonder if you could first tell us a little bit about Watch Your Head and how it got started. Was there a particular moment of inspiration for the project?
Yeah, there was. In September 2019, I had hosted a literary event as part of an environmental protest around, it was happening around the Toronto International Film Festival. And it was a last minute thing, and many writers, agreed to be part of it the last minute. And I was just so moved, and some of them wrote works specifically for the event. I was so moved by the work, I wanted to share it on the site, and I had experience running an online literary journal, so I thought, I acted without thinking, and I just thought, why not do one focused on climate justice? And after I shared the website, Alana Wilcox from Coach House asked us if we wanted to do a print anthology with the proceeds being donated to climate organizations, and we chose Raven Trust and Climate Justice Toronto.
That's great. Do you want to tell us a little tiny bit about what Raven Trust and Climate Justice Toronto get up to?
Yeah, Raven raises legal defense funds to assist Indigenous peoples who enforce their rights and title to protect their traditional territory. And Climate Justice Toronto is a justice-focused, youth-led grassroots organization that is fighting colonialism and environmental racism and capitalism and all but the thing that's interesting about it is youth-focused as well and very intersectional. So. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you mentioned you've got an anthology, you've got the Watch Your Head website. And it's really, a diverse and varied body of work with fiction, nonfiction, poetry, art. Well over 100 different people have contributed to the project, I think, by my count. What is it that kind of unites it all and that you hope people take away from an encounter with Watch Your Head?
Yeah, well, first of all, we had 15 editors, including myself, in the print anthology, and I think we have 25 editors now on the site. So part of it is this kind of collective action to say, look, we're writers and artists, and we're concerned about this, and we want our society to do something about it. So there's that. We want people to know that they're not alone in their concerns about the climate crisis, and I would say more significantly climate justice. But more importantly, we really hope people will take action. We want to sort of show a path forward, a path to action through such things as it could be talking or writing about these issues, organizing events, signing petitions, writing to government officials, attending and supporting protests, particularly land and water defenders, donating to grassroots organizations, making governments accountable. Even though we have a liberal government, our government is very pro-pipeline. And thank you to one of the executive orders yesterday, Keystone, I believe, has been canceled. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so we have to make our politicians, even the ones who attempt to say the right things but act differently, we need to keep them accountable. So that's kind of what we're all about. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody. That's kind of that, but that's kind of we have our mission statement up there, and people who are involved in the project care about those things. So.
Cool. And how can other writers get involved in the project?
Well, the wonderful thing about the site is that we're still accepting submissions, and our submission guidelines are on the website. We're particularly interested in things that are focused on climate justice and not looking at the climate crisis as a faraway problem that doesn't affect people. So we're really interested in acknowledging that people are impacted right now in the work that we produce as well. So check out our submission guidelines, but we have ongoing submissions. So we're still putting up work we got 500 submissions from the call for the print anthology, and because we have this online site, we were able to publish some more submissions than the 85 that were in the print anthology. So we're quite grateful for that.
Were there any sort of surprises when you opened up the submission process in terms of what you started seeing?
Just that there were a lot of submissions. Like we had over 500, and I think when I initially got really involved, I was really moved to take some action. I mean, I've been interested in the environment and have done things for a long time, but really came to a peak after the UN report that, back in, I think it was 2018 or 19, all the years are a blur right now, that they said we had 12 years to reduce emissions. And so I just personally was feeling really alone, and just knowing that there's so many people writing about this and they care about it. And I, happy that we can provide a place to channel that work and, hopefully get people talking about this and more people acting.
Yeah, well, it is a really impressive body of work. This is the book, and of course the community that you've built around it as a collective has been really inspiring to see as well. And we're really excited to talk to some of the contributors. Before we do, I wonder, is there a piece or an excerpt you'd like to share to set the table, or do you want to just dive right in with the panelists?
I actually would like to set the table because I do use the term climate justice, and some people might not know what we mean by that. And so this is an excerpt from the introduction. It's a section that Stephen Collis wrote. Climate justice acknowledges the fact that the radical ecological and biospheric transformation currently unfolding on our planet is predicated upon social inequalities and embeds future inequalities. In other words, the extractive industrial practices driving global warming and all of its associated depletions are an extension of a historical colonization built upon the theft of the lands and bodies of Indigenous and Black peoples, which continues today by displacing largely Indigenous peoples from their land, and will, as the climate warms, disproportionately impact racialized communities, so-called developing nations in the global South, and other marginalized people. So a climate justice approach insists that questions of colonization and decolonization, racism, anti-Blackness, and other forms of forcibly maintained social inequalities, exclusions, and persecutions cannot be separated from the question of the climate and the planet's eroding natural environment.
Powerful stuff. Yeah, so with that, thank you, Kathryn. I'll hand it over to you to introduce our amazing panel.
Okay, great. And will you be bringing them on? They'll be like, I don't have.
They'll pop up on the screen.
Oh, they'll pop up. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm glad I'm not responsible for any technical.
No, it's all up to us.
This is a nice platform. I haven't used it before.
Yeah, it's called StreamYard. We used it for the.
Okay. I'm not seeing anybody else. Are any of the other panelists here? Oh, okay. I'm to introduce that. Okay, great. Sorry. I'm new to this technology. I'm joining you from the Bruce Peninsula, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Nation, the people of Three Fires, known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And I'd like to further give thanks to the traditional keepers of this land, the Chippewa, the Saugeen, and the Chippewa of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwa Nation. And land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process. And Watch Your Head is one way that I'm committed to fighting it. It's my pleasure to introduce these four wonderful writers. I thought I would introduce each writer and invite them to read a short excerpt from their piece and Watch Your Head rather than reading all of the bios at once. So we'll go in alphabetical order, and first up is Carleigh Baker. Carleigh is a Cree Métis Icelandic writer. She was born and raised on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Stalho people. Her first collection of stories, Bad Endings, won the City of Vancouver Book Award. Welcome, Carleigh, and we'd love to hear a piece, an excerpt from your piece in Watch Your Head.
Hi, Kathryn. Thank you. Happy to be here. Decided to go with the book rather than to try to open up another file. I've got 900 files open on my computer already. So thank you. Really happy to be here. And I have to say hello to English 472. I see a couple of my students in the chat already. Thanks for coming, folks. And thanks for having me, Kathryn, and you folks at Word on the Street. So my story is called Greywater, and I don't need to give it. It's autofiction, highly autobiographical, and so the character is essentially me. And at the time, I was pining for writing letters to a person that I thought I was in love with, and so that's in there. There's a lot going on in the story, and also basically spending a lot of time alone. I'll get into that later. So the format is basically a series of letters. Your letter hasn't arrived yet. I know it takes you a while to write them since you insist on using that complex pen and ink cursive. It's beautiful. The letters are masterpieces, exercises in shape and form, gentle thoughts, flowing words, but it takes forever. And sometimes I wish you'd apply that same quantity over quality value to personal interaction that you have for flash fiction. No offense, the quality of the flash fiction is still very high. I read a BuzzFeed article that said introverts have no time for small talk, but small talk has a purpose sometimes. It fills in the cracks between people. Maybe I'll get your letter tomorrow and feel bad for sniping at you. I'm sorry. It takes mail extra long to get to the island, of course. Everything here is slower and more expensive. I thought the slower part would be nice, but damn, we're talking really slow. Amanda called to check in on the dahlias. Can you believe that? She didn't ask how I was doing. The dahlias are fine, and the herbs are spectacular. They love a good drought. I was so annoyed at her when I got off the phone that I decided to have a bath. But there was still some gray water left in the tub, not much, about 2 inches. I sponged out a little into stainless steel bowls, but then I gave up and just ran the damn water. Baths aren't really the cleanest endeavor anyway, sitting in your old filth, slewed skin, bacteria. I noticed that the sides of the tub were a little crusty, so I decided I'd completely empty it and clean it out after the bath. But I was so relaxed when I got out, I lay down on the bed and I fell asleep. Now it's morning, and the water has been sitting in there all night, and I'm feeling really guilty. I'll take a bunch downstairs to the garden. It's Monday, upper body shower day, which is good because my hair is kind of gross after soaking in the tub. I should have tied it up. Not like there's anyone here to notice. You know, I've seen photos of the drought situation in California, comparison between now and 10 years ago, reservoirs, riverbeds, lakes. Have you seen the photos? The situation looks pretty grim. But last time we visited, I remember people watering their lawns, boulevards with lush green grass, the long, long shower we took together in the morning before we left. All the swimming pools we passed over on our flight home, little blue tiles crammed into an uncomfortable crush of stucco and asphalt. Water is everything, and they don't have much. Neither do we. The boulevards in Vancouver were green when I left. Are they still? Don't you feel guilty every time you take a drink? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carleigh. Wonderful. Next up, we have Simone Dalton. Simone is a Trinidadian Canadian writer, arts educator, and recipient of the 2020 RBC Taylor Emerging Writer Prize for Nonfiction. Her work is anthologized in Watch Your Head, Black Writers Matter, and The Unpublished City Volume 1. Her play Vows was produced in 2019. As a memoirist, she explores themes of grief, inherited histories, race, class, and identity. Welcome,
Hi.
Simone.
Hi, Kathryn. Thank you so much for having me. And it's funny, even though I'm Trinidadian, I'm now sitting in beautiful Antigua, so I must say hello to my Antiguan friends who I know are watching. And my piece is called Notes from a Small Place. It's actually about St. Lucia. I had not been paying attention, the writer and the human. We were both implicated, united by this flow. The human did what humans sometimes do, exist rather than upang. This is the price of being preoccupied with the result and not the cause. This is what happens when you have been numbed into believing that circumstances, floods, droughts, pipe-borne diseases, escalating food prices, just happen and must keep happening because they have always happened and you have no power to stop them from happening. When you are trapped by a memory, the sky opened and targetless arrows of water rained down for spite. Everyone, everything, everywhere was in a line of fire. The foundation under your neighbor's house yawned. The trees and the soil around his house could not hold any more water because while the soil remained, the trees were gone. You watched the red dirt of the track your house sat on turn to red mud. One election season, a government official with a sense of humor named the track a trace, a word that indicates a road. The mud caked against the steps up to the front door of your house. You waited. When a bold-faced flash of blue appeared in the sky, you dug. You did not have anywhere to put the mud, not since the last time, so you slung it to the next side until the sky was again pissed off. The human blamed the rain, not who took the trees. The human is from a small place, her memory a mere harbinger of far worse memories of other humans from other small places, places like Antigua and Barbuda. The writer is a tourist. She soaks in the mud from sulfur springs for pleasure, hikes in rainstorms for spiritual release. She offers thoughts and prayers to a sky of uninterrupted blue, hypnotized by the possibilities it whispers. She feels invincible, buoyed by her ability to get away, to turn memory into a muse. Without missing a beat, she turns on Spotify and sketches what she dreams. She plans for a house on a hill in a small place, not a large house, just one that sits on land where she can grow trees for fruit and trees for beauty, where she can hike to the summit barefoot with her notebook in one hand while the other is perpetually sticky from the juice of mangoes. It is only in the dreaming that it dawns to the writer what will remain of the small place when she's ready to plant her first tree. 5, 10, 15 years from now, a year after the next hurricane, will there be a hill, or will her bare feet succumb to the treeless, red mud sinking until none of her remains to see the onset of darkness of the night or the soft light of the next day? Unable to see the birds when they appear, did the writer learn nothing from the human? Who said there will be birds? Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. Interesting, the drought from Carleigh and then the water in your piece. Lovely. Up next, we have Christine Leclerc. Christine lives and works and studies in Coast Salish homelands, Burnaby, BC. She's an award-winning author and physical geography major at Simon Fraser University. Leclerc serves on the nonprofit boards of Embark Sustainability and Climatch, and also has served on the board of the Sierra Club BC. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you to the fellow panelists who have just read. I really was moved by your readings. I want to just acknowledge specifically the territories I'm in right now, which are the territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Musqueam nations. And this is more or less a chronicle from 2019. So I'll just go for it here. On December 6th, the crosswalk near Nuevos Ministerios metro station in Madrid may become one of the most photographed crosswalks on Earth. If the city's September 27th climate strike is anything to go by, we can expect thousands to flood the area. Currently, tens of thousands are in the Spanish cosmopolis for UN conferences to advance climate action, launching crosswalks like this into the global spotlight. Relentless global climate strikes demonstrate strong political will for bold climate action among we the peoples, the ones to whom heads of government are accountable. Perplexingly, despite this global mandate, many nations continue to stall or send mixed messages about their commitment to neutralizing the climate crisis and upholding Indigenous rights, the right to a healthy environment, and the right to a livable future. However, much disagreement there may be among and within nations, there's something that unites us, and that is the crosswalk. All nations have crosswalks, or concepts like it, to tell us whose turn it is to go. Crosswalks around the world may differ in design, but the values they balance are remarkably similar. In the case of crosswalks that bisect roadways, we see the interplay of values such as mobility and safety. When we travel to other countries, we recognize and use crosswalks. Perhaps most importantly, there is no place where people who do not want to stop for pedestrians can hit them with impunity. These pieces of civic infrastructure are as universal as the values of security and autonomy. What I suggest is that crosswalks and the bylaws that establish them are so consistently applied around the world, including in marine settings, that they operate as an international law would, except with tens of thousands of courts to uphold the law rather than one. The climate crisis is killing people whose communities are being destroyed by extreme weather, sea level rise, and wildfires. There are also less sensational but equally tragic deaths, like that of the man who tries to drive his snowmobile across a lake that no longer freezes to the previous depth, or the elderly person who cannot afford the air conditioning on a fixed income and passes in a lengthy heat wave. Unlike jaywalking or reckless driving, one needn't act to put one's life at risk when it comes to climate change. For now, simply living puts us at risk, not just as individuals, but as a species. Yet critics of global democratic governance argue against straightforward measures to ensure rapid decarbonization, such as an end to fossil fuel subsidies, a fully costed global price on carbon, and land use rules to protect biodiversity. So all we need is a global patchwork of ambitious bylaws to address these issues, right? While cities are in many ways leading the charge on decarbonization, significant greenhouse gas emissions occur outside of cities, so a more universal instrument is needed to actualize our shared values of interdependence with other species and a livable future. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and the destruction of the Earth's carbon sinks, we've been driving too fast. Heads of government must have thus far failed to act on the fact that we are about to drive off a cliff. Indeed, to avoid runaway climate change, emissions must peak in 2020. Now is the time to stop and put in a global crosswalk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Up next, we have Carrianne Leung, a fiction writer and educator. Her debut novel, The Wondrous Woo, was shortlisted for the 2014 Toronto Book Awards. Her collection of linked stories, That Time I Loved You, was named one of the best books of 2018 by CBC, shortlisted for the Toronto Book Awards in 2019, longlisted for the Canada Reads 2019, and awarded the Danutagli Literary Award in 2019. She's currently working on a new novel titled The After. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you to all my fellow panelists. It's a real honor to be here with you. My piece in the anthology is called Writing in a Dangerous Time, and it's an essay. So I think I'll just read the last page from that essay. And that last section is called Of Endings, of Futures. During one sleepless night, while I waited for my child to be born, I learned that birth requires patience. I recalled that it was bloody, full of pain, full of euphoria, utterly magic. And so now I think maybe patience is required for all kinds of birth, to write, to listen, to die. Even in death, there is a process of creation. And so even in this moment, I remember there needs to be patience. As I was finishing writing this, I read an article in the Washington Post by Dan Zak titled, Everything is Not Going to Be Okay, How to Live with Constant Reminders that the Earth is in Trouble. He writes, hold the problem in your mind, freak out, but don't put it down, give it a quarter turn, see it like a scientist, and as a poet, as a descendant, as an ancestor. I will be slow and patient as I turn the problems in rotation and trust that the stories are coming. I have deep respect for the work of writers. We sit in solitude and meditation and reflection for many hours of our days, crafting something exquisite that comes with pain, with joy, with tremendous purpose. Sometimes we turn to write as simply a way to relieve ourselves and our readers of this pain of existence, to offer shelter. And I do not mean to take away such necessary relief and shelter. But I do want to ask you, respectfully, gently, to not avert your gaze from the wounds of this world. I would like your participation in this project of what it means to be human in our fullest form, with each other, whether that be in your writing, in your relations, in your sense of yourself in the world. I believe in the power of literature and the power of writers. We have a special opportunity and responsibility ahead. How privileged we are to be writers, how brave, how open we are to be the witness and the mirror. How lucky we are to be in a web of relations to everything. And also this, as much as the times we live in are dire, we are also fortunate to be the ones living in it. It seems that we have some choices to make. It seems that we do this day by day, just as we will write it word by word. I think we can be afraid, but I think we can also have courage. I extend my hand to you. I watch this butterfly cross. I'll keep looking for bees. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was so wonderful to read your pieces to myself, but it's quite moving to hear you all read these pieces. They're all so beautiful. In each of the works, I was kind of noticing that there's an imagining of something better. In Carleigh's story, Grey Water, the narrator makes an ecosystem out of old bath water. In Simone's Notes from a Small Place, offers a call for collective consciousness in dealing with colonialism, capitalism, and environmental catastrophe. She writes, I am is an invitation to we are. Christine in Planet at the Crossroads uses the metaphor of the universal crosswalk as a call for international policy on climate change. And Carrianne, writing in a dangerous time, gives us space as she writes, think about, talk about, and write towards something. I find these pieces all deeply moving, profoundly hopeful and constructive. I was wondering if each of you could talk about the genesis of your piece and what your had. How did it come about? Why did you write it? And any thoughts, even reflecting on it now and in our current moment. These were all written before the pandemic, I believe. So we'll start with. How about we start with Carrianne? We'll go reverse chronological.
Okay. I think that there was a time where I was just I was trying to think of what to write, and in this moment I wasn't sure what story we need, you know. And I was having a lot of problems trying to even reach for the language to talk about this kind of amorphous and disenfranchised grief that we live. So I was invited to do a keynote in Fredericton at WordFest, and I took that opportunity to give myself the time to write something about it, to try to reach for a grammar to talk about what we're going through. So I think that's what happened and came up with this paper.
Yeah. Well, it's a very generous piece because I think your questions are questions that many writers are asking about, you know, how to make, what is art in a time of catastrophe? How do we, you know, and I think it's very powerful. Thank you. Christine.
Yes. You know, like Carrianne, I think I was asking myself the question of what should I be writing at this time? I had an opportunity to attend COP25 and in 2019. And, you know, because I have a writing practice, I thought, well, I should somehow try to chronicle this in some way. And I'd also been working with a think tank that was focused on global democratic solutions to global challenges, such as climate change. And it just struck me that perhaps there wasn't a lot of discourse about international cooperation and the need to look beyond borders to achieve climate justice. And so that kind of motivated me to write that essay.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's just so much of the writing around climate change is we're doomed, and it creates a sense of hopelessness. And so, you know, it's really nice to all of these pieces do have that, you know, not to shine happiness on a serious subject, but it's hard to function if there's only negativity, if there isn't a way through. So I found that really great about your piece. Thank you. Simone.
I didn't know what I was going to write, to be honest. For me, writing has become a sort of exercise in creative self-interrogation, a way for me to sort of look at the good and bad truths within my own life and asking bold and difficult questions. The editor who approached me for the piece was Kenisia Lubrin, and I said yes immediately. And then silently said, what the insert your expletives am I going to write? Because I felt completely out of my depth as it relates to climate justice, to be honest, at that moment. And so I started there with asking myself the questions. What was behind the feeling? What did I not know? What, you know, did I know? And so, sure, I had, you know, been living as a fairly responsible citizen, doing what I was supposed to do around garbage disposal. But beyond that, you know, was I really doing anything else? And why was I carrying out those actions? For me, it seemed to be more around the consequence and not really activism as such. And so when I started the piece and asking those questions, while I'm not past that threshold, I would say, I think it became a chance for me to actually sit and pay attention, which is how the piece sort of begins, and actually move to a new level of consciousness to figure out what is my role and responsibility in this particular time.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think the reader moves through that with you, because the questions you ask yourself, I found as a reader, I was asking, what am I, paying attention to? And I just, I think it's very instructive, for the readers as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Carleigh.
Yeah, I wrote Greywater many years ago, and I was on Galliano Island. I had told, which is a very lush Gulf island off the coast of Vancouver here, with a comparatively light human footprint. I guess I would say there's a lot of forest on Galliano, and I went there chasing that cliche writer dream of I need some time alone. I've got to be alone. And I ended up really alone. Like I ended up in a little sort of one-room cabin with no cell service and spotty internet. And if I stood in the right side of the cabin at the right side of the day, I could get internet. And so it was just living the dream. And 5 out of 10, don't recommend, but some good writing happened. And what I noticed was that while I was there, as things got quieter, because I am easily overwhelmed, and I left the city thinking I can't handle this. Quiet can be quite overwhelming as well. But in the early stages of the quiet, things began to get more quiet, I started to see things more and notice things. And Galliano was in the middle of, there have been some pretty heavy droughts here on the West Coast, and on a Gulf island, a drought is a very serious matter because there's not a lot of water. Most folks have got water reserve tanks, and there's an amazing volunteer fire department, but you can imagine that the resources are lower. So I was observing neighbors go out to shout at other neighbors for using gas-powered tools, and just being out in the forest quite a bit. The other thing I sort of have to admit about myself is, I'm really envious of people that go to the forest to seek solace. As it turns out, I was also afraid of the forest, and it took me a long time to get out and spend time out there. But as I did, I just started to pay attention to what a drought looked like in a rainforest, basically. So there was a lot of strange stuff going on, and the things. I don't know what it is with Galliano. It's quite the place. One day I was walking along the road, and I assume this is what happened for fiction's sake. I just kind of imagined, but it looked like one of the birds flying overhead accidentally dropped a lizard on the ground in front of me. And moments like this that I was like, what's going on here? Is this a message, or does this just happen to writers? Like cool stuff happens to us that we get to put in our stories. And so a couple things happened. My perception widened. My mental health went a little sideways because being alone turned out to be very challenging. So that's what happened, is the character in this story sees more, but also, certainly as what happens with the weird scene where she builds an ecosystem in the bathtub, she sort of simultaneously becomes a little troubled, and her perception sort of opens about the state of the world at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to ask each of you something specific about your piece again. So I'll start with Carleigh, because we're already talking about this. The other thing, there were two things that crossed my mind as I was reading the story. One is that it kind of reads a bit like a pandemic story. I'm kind of in a very rural area right now, and I'm even though I really care about the environment, I don't really like being in it. And it does cause me some anxiety. So I really related to the character. But the thing that I noticed about, so it felt like a pandemic story in some ways, because so many people are isolated right now. But also that you have a really dry sense of humor. Your character is quite funny, even though the subject matter is, I mean, that's your voice. You're quite funny, but I'm thinking of the line, "You have boulevards, I have baths, we are terrible." Like yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you use humor to offset the serious subject matter? There's also a longing and a loss of a relationship in your story. The narrator keeps writing to a lover who's not writing back. And yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Both in life and in literature, I guess, I really use humor as a survival method. It's in life, I will commonly, it's dark laughter, but I just, it's also easier in social situations because I tend to have this go sideways into darkness suddenly in conversation. And if you laugh it off afterwards and people are like, ha, okay, that was a little bit weird. But it gets me through. And I will commonly, in some of the hardest times that I've been in, you just have to laugh. Like what I guess there are other things that you can do, but I don't know what they are and I don't utilize them. So, and in writing, I personally believe that if readers are, I just call it like a steam valve. I think if I want to present really challenging material, and I guess it's maybe a bit of an awkward laugh too, because those are me in a lot of those stories, and these characters aren't heroes most of the time. So if there's maybe a bit of awkward laughter, but also I believe that if I'm going to take the character or the readers into somewhere dark, then I think that it's my job to provide a steam valve and just an opportunity to let steam out and laugh. So that enables me to get into more challenging material while helping the readers to, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more because I think climate change is a classic example of something that if I get too overwhelmed, I stop listening personally. And that's what I'm trying to do with the humor. Yeah.
And also I think, I think people would be surprised that in the anthology, it's not only about doom and gloom. There are lots of moments in in all the different works as well. And it's really kind of important, the levity. Thanks so much. Simone, I'm really struck by the line in Notes from a Small Place, art has the power to make the invisible obvious. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I think that comes from the process of writing. And so I was writing to something, as I said, trying to answer and ask myself some questions. I was also thinking about other writers and other artists who do this type of work, particularly in the space of political activism and their responsibility and their role that they play in trying to make something that is sometimes difficult to see or hear that much more palatable in the way that it is presented. So I think I was working through what that might mean in my own practice and my own work as a writer and the things that I'm preoccupied with and that I write a great deal about. Just trying to figure out what role does my art play as it relates to making the invisible, making us be able to see certain things. And so it's working through, I think, as you have mentioned, when you read the piece, it is I start with egrets, and so it is, for me became, as Carrianne has said, became a mirror, something for me to set my eyes on that then opened up so many other doors that I had not expected to be there. I think it's also important for me to say that this piece was inspired in part by Jamaica Kincaid's A Small Place, written in 1988. And at that time, she was writing what in some cases is a very scathing, but also quite darkly funny piece addressing the tourists, particularly the European tourists, as she was speaking about the effect of colonialism on Antigua, where she was born. And when I think about where I sat writing this piece, because I read, her work before I started working on this, and now sitting in Antigua 32 plus years later, and experiencing Antigua at a time when we have this global pandemic, and seeing how many of the issues that she raised at that time, just seeing how important they still are today.
Yeah.
And so it is that idea that art, has the opportunity to really make us aware and open up our eyes to these things.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, I found your narrator also used some humor as well in there's a really lovely tone in there. I think sometimes readers, like, they hear what this topic is about and they think, oh, I don't want to deal with that. And but a lot there is, we're talking about difficult things, but there's the voices of everybody. There is humor, there is joy, there is hope, and so thank you again for your voice as well. Christine, you originally wrote your piece, as you were saying, in December 2019 for Ricochet magazine. Have you seen any shift in the global response to the climate crisis since then? Like, what are your kind of thoughts from a kind of journalistic point of view? Do you see any hope in the trend, in what the call to action that you put in your piece? Do you see do you see there's a global cooperation, or
to be honest, I'm not sure that I see a giant kind of move in the needle. I'll just say a couple of things on this. While I was in Madrid, and I didn't have to be in Madrid to learn this, but at the conference, one thing that I was particularly stunned by is that the nations who were convened did not recognize or accept the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and so that's the main scientific verdict on what's happening, and with recommendations on what needs to happen, and to see that people who are in a position to be negotiating on what our futures will look like, and in a non-accountable fashion, not accept the science, even just even if they're not acting on it as urgently as they need to, even to not even acknowledge it within their meetings officially, I found really shocking. But at the same time, awareness continues to grow. So you can't put the jack back in the box in this case. It's, I think probably all of us have seen, in our own lifetimes. I graduated, from university without a single course ever mentioning climate change. And I think that should not happen anymore. But I think it is still happening. I graduated from high school without ever learning anything about climate change, yet climate change was getting to be quite advanced by that time. So I also, I think that, education is really important, and media is also taking up communication of these issues more. If you look at statistics from 2000 and the early 2000s to now, there was in the noughts, towards the end of the noughts, a big leap in how much media coverage was happening globally about climate change, and that has more or less maintained over the past decade or so. So I'm hopeful that we'll see another big leap, sometime in the next years. But kind of deadlines are looming. So I think that there's more people who are wanting to talk about this in a more urgent fashion. And I think humor and all the ways to make it relatable are very important. You see media outlets like The Guardian working to, instead of using pictures of polar bears, which I know people who live in the north can relate very much to polar bears, but let's say people living elsewhere, it might, again, have that kind of impression of climate change being very distant and not affecting us. But I think media outlets like that are taking a very responsible stance in that they're committing themselves to showing how climate change is affecting us all over the world, either, in terms of flooding, in terms of the cost to taxpayers with all the interventions that are needed to adapt to sea level rise. So there's a lot of good work, and there are more and more media outlets who are committing to daily coverage of the climate crisis. So just so that the public is informed, because part of people in democracies consenting to the policies that are needed to address the crisis is for people to be informed, and to be able to kind of embrace the changes that are needed, even though sometimes they come at a cost. I am hopeful overall, and I don't have any doubt that it's possible to get to where we need to be. But I think, with this issue, as with many other issues, it can feel like however fast things are going, it doesn't feel fast enough.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Carrianne, you write, what audacity do we need now? I'll offer my answer. We need each other. Can you comment on this?
Yes, I can. I think, the ways in which we come to understand ourselves in any kind of crisis is very shaped by a neoliberal understanding of the individual. And I think that part of the challenge that we have in taking any action is that we are very much siloed. I mean, we see it with COVID now, right? Like the slogan when it all happened was, "We're in it together." We're not in it together at all. And I really like the framing that you read from Stephen Cullis of the introduction, is that I push against even the term climate justice or climate change, because in it, I feel like there are erasures of colonialism, imperialism, war, transatlantic slavery. And we need to consider that this is not something that is an event that has just happened, but has been ongoing. And for some folks in the world and on this land, the apocalypse has already happened, and they're surviving it and telling us about the after, right? So for me, in thinking about we need each other, in that is in a very deep way of, relationality from the ways in which we get Indigenous teachings from, is if we were to think of catastrophe as a relationship rather than as an event that we are anticipating and as hovering over our head, that there's a timeline that's going to happen, then I think that then we just silo, So I don't know what the way to engage is. I don't know. I think of all this kind of, for me, I'm still looking for the language, right? I think that we're still all looking for the language that exceeds how we understand ourselves in the world, right? Like, I think we really need to, I think Simone's piece talks a lot about consciousness. It's a crisis of consciousness as much as it's a crisis, an ecological crisis. And so those are things that I'm thinking about. And I very much want to reach others. And I think the anthology and us being here is part of that, is finding each other in these places. I don't know if I answered the question, but
You did.
That's where my mind goes when I think about needing each other. Yeah.
What conversations would you like to see happening this is a question I'll pose to everyone, but Carrianne, since it's sort of related to what you were talking about as well, what conversations would you like to see happening in literary circles or in the broader media? What's not happening that you'd like to see?
I don't really know. When I think about my literary community, I'm not even really sure what that means. Like, I have particular friendships with other writers, and we talk about this stuff all the time, but maybe not in the broader sense. I'm putting together, I'm going to plug my event, if that's okay.
Please do. Please do.
I'm the Barker Fairley distinguished visitor. That makes me feel so happy to be a distinguished visitor. No one's ever called me that before at U of T. And I'm putting together a discussion with Cherie Demeline, Kinesia Lubrin, Taya Lim, and Catherine Hernandez. And the title is called Playing with Time, Diasporic Presence and Speculative Futures. And I really want to talk about the temporal in our work, right? Because I feel like all of our texts, even when a lot of our texts are called dystopic, because we're writing about the world in ruins, it's actually present, right? Like, I don't even know what dystopia means anymore, or what the future, writing about the future means, because we're so haunted by the past. And so I would really love to have more discussions about what we're all thinking as writers, because I know I'm not the only one sitting around wondering, what the hell am I supposed to write now, right? Yeah. So even starting from a place of that, and having cross conversations, not just with writers, but with other artists, with scientists, with, Indigenous elders, and to bring into the circle, because I think we need all of us, right? And so I think I'm thinking really large, but those are the kinds of conversations I'm really interested in now.
So you're starting the conversation you want to have, and then as well, like in your yes. You're doing it. You're not
such aloneness. There's such solitude in sitting here with all of this bearing on us, all of it, right? Mm-hmm. Bearing on us, and I think that we need to have difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks very much. Anybody else want to jump in on that, about conversations you'd like to see happening in either the literary art, broader media, that people aren't talking about?
I don't mind jumping in. I think.
Oh, great.
I think for me, and it relates to my interest in this idea of inherited histories. And the reason why the egrets in my piece featured so much was this idea of this migratory pull. When I say inherited histories, I'm speaking about my history as an immigrant into Canada, following my father, who followed someone else, who followed someone else. And when I was writing the piece, I had this moment where I realized that I had so little reference or understanding of what settler means, as someone who had settled in Canada, and also in the real history behind Canada's Indigenous peoples, because I moved in this sort of pursuit of progress, my vision of a dream. And Ta-Nehisi Coates speaks about this in Between the World and Me, that it made everything else small around me because I was focused on this path. And so within my family that have all kind of moved up and been able to buy their house on a cul-de-sac in East Scarborough or in Brampton or wherever, there's little to no conversation about whose land we're on. There's little to no conversation on what is happening with regards to the water crisis in Canada. And so in my community, in my Black Caribbean community, I think we have to have more conversations about those types of issues, as well as those that we're having around racism and colonialism and all the other pieces, because we are now a part of this society.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. Carleigh or Christine, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. And I want to preface this by saying that I think that a project like this requires many different conversations. And so while this might seem like almost a backstep in a way when there are so many pressing things to be done, and I mean, like so much of Christine, what you've talked about today so that I agree with, that there's a lot of work to be done. And in some ways it feels like everything just got put on hold during the pandemic for somewhat understandable, but still frustrating, to that effect. What I am really interested in, and I think this might be because I teach creative writing, because I teach climate change writing at SFU. And one of the things that I noticed with my students is that many of the stories, when I asked folks to write stories about climate change, the first place that many folks went was to guilt and shame. And I've been at a couple of gatherings, big gatherings of writers and scientists. And Carrianne, I wish you'd been there, because also on Galliano Island, that place just keeps calling me back. The first, after all of this, we walked around the island. We talked about, whose land we were on. We talked about, we met the tree that is like the oldest tree on Galliano and was saved when a bunch of the forest was logged. But when we all went back to share, the first place that the conversation went there was guilt and shame. So, while I recognize that we can't marinate in this forever, I believe that guilt and shame freezes. And I would love for there to be conversations. This is probably more appropriate in smaller community groups, maybe than having the media involved. But I would love there to be conversations among writers that it's sort of to me, it's the beginning point. I know Naomi Klein has talked about this as well, is that if we are bombarding ourselves with, man, I should have recycled more, or how come I didn't believe this? How did this get so far before I was willing to believe that this was real? Or I wrote a story about the hole in the ozone layer, which I learned about when I was a teenager, and was just like, so what's that going to look like? Like a black hole where laser beams are going to come through and the sun's going to kill us, and just took it zero. Also, it was presented as hairspray, women's hairspray. So women were, what do you know, women at fault for the hole in the ozone layer. So that so much guilt and shame gets heaped on. So, of course, we'll understand we can't just sit around and talk about that forever. We do have to get on those picket lines and march. That's what interests me, I guess, is conversations about releasing that and then getting to work.
Yeah, great. It's interesting because your character in your story has a bit of that. She's taking the bath instead of the 3-minute shower, where each day she washes a different part of her body. And I think, that's interesting. That's great. Thanks so much. Christine, do you have anything to add on conversations you'd like to see?
Yes. I guess it's more an openness perhaps to developing new literacies. And so I think that, we often kind of in our culture can tend to, identify a lot with our main profession or avocation. And I think that, we all have so much potential to understand ourselves in a variety of ways. And I think that, I think it would be great if the media would provide more kind of science-based reporting, for example, or also but also more kind of intersectional analysis of climate issues or other issues for that matter. Those would be two things.
That's great. Thank you. I was going to ask, do you have, does anyone want to jump in on this one? Do you have any advice, Carleigh? Your comment sort of reminded me of this, and also your teaching climate writing course. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to write about these issues?
I guess the first place that we started was to, maybe this is a bit of a cop-out because this is just what you say to writers in general, is to read. We read widely, and we read we all went to the Watch Your Head website right away, of course, and checked that out. But yeah, hashtag watch your head, everyone. But we did, but we read widely, and we read a Joy. I think the first thing we read in class was a Joy Harjo poem that was about a family coming together around a table, and there was so much joy in the and then we read it like an absurdist story basically afterwards, and it must have seemed strange because the students for me to be like, hey, climate change folks, it's hilarious, but that was the first place I went, was that there are many different ways to reach the goal that you want, and that maybe that if a person chooses to think of themselves as a part of a system, a greater system, where you don't have to do everything, you don't have to save the world with your story, and that you can identify where you want to work, where your spot is that you want to work in, and that's okay. You can as a writer, I mean, I have two Carleighs. There's Carleigh the writer and Carleigh who goes out and does stuff in the world. Not right now, but as far as the writing is concerned, that find that spot, and don't feel that you have to every piece that you write that addresses something like this is going to either save the world or it was a failure. You'll never work in this town again.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on the advice for someone who wants to write about these issues?
Yeah,
I mean, Carrianne, your piece is sort of that too, isn't it?
It's sort of, yeah. I think it was really I use writing as a way to discover what it is I'm thinking and feeling. I really I think Simone called it creative self-interrogation. Yeah, I think that's kind of what is really great about what we can do, is that, we find meaning through the writing. So I think it took me months to write that essay. Like, I really stumbled with the language because a lot of what we're talking about doesn't even have language yet, right? To talk about it. And that's also very exciting because with language, we're also shifting our consciousness around these things so that we are in a better position to be able to address it. So I think that it is scary, but it could also be really funny, and it's very joyful, and all of those things. So I did end up writing another novel after this, and Carleigh knows because I talk about this raccoon a lot on social media. I started writing from the point of view of a raccoon, and it's an apocalyptic fairy tale is what the new novel is about. And it's hilarious. This raccoon is really horny and really bitchy. And she walks around this city that's, where humans are leaving because, it's the apocalypse is coming. So for me, it was really interesting to feel like I can maybe put some distance from myself and the world by having this character that was so unlike me, right? That has a different sensibility and a sense of the world than me, and to write from their eyes. And I think that that's something that has really shifted for me after writing this essay, is to be able to attend to things more so. It's like Simone and the egrets, right? It's that consciousness. Suddenly when there's this opening, maybe through the grief and through the pain, but there is this new consciousness that comes that offers maybe new possibilities. So I would encourage, people who want to write about these issues is just follow the writing, and not force it so much. Just go along for the ride.
Yeah, in some ways there are a lot of similarities between yours and Simone's piece in terms of that kind of writing through and the self introspection, and it's almost like you're writing through, and then you're also able to maybe write differently when you come out of that piece. Yeah. Simone or Christine, do you have any thoughts on advice for someone who wants to write about these issues?
I think I agree wholeheartedly with Carleigh and Carrianne. I did reference Barbadian Canadian writer Austin Clarke in my piece, whose very simple phrase stuck with me. And he said before he died that he believed writers should let the world come at them. And I think that speaks to this idea of, if it's whatever allows you to ask yourself these questions and explore these thoughts and feelings, whether they be raccoons or egrets, or now I'm obsessed with neem trees, which are beautiful in Antigua. But it's all of these things that you just have to keep jotting these notes down, and eventually you can figure out, what are you writing towards, and so that's how it feels for me. And I really take Austin Clarke's words to heart.
Yeah. Thank you.
I suppose I too gravitate towards an intuitive approach for myself, mainly in the sense that I try to find what's grabbing me, even if I don't understand why it's grabbing me, and write into that. But I think that I somewhat am a little bit of a glutton for punishment, because I also think it's, for myself anyway, I shouldn't say, maybe perhaps advise others to do this if they really don't feel like it speaks to them. But I find that I also like to challenge myself to if something really turns me off, I try to look at that too, because I think there's something to the things that we gravitate towards. But then for me, I feel like there's also something to the things that I have an aversion to. So I try to take both approaches a little bit.
Look at what you're resistant to. Yeah. I also think even that in your writing and what you're reading too is it's always interesting. Thank you so much. I think we have some questions from the audience, so I will just read them out here. Angela asks, how do you find the courage to write on such depressing topics? We may have touched on this a little bit, but does anyone have anything to add on that? We've used humor and self-introspection and
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll say besides that is that I tend to layer in issues of climate change with other thematic elements. So I have not written a story that is entirely, I guess, about climate change. And I think that would be very challenging in a fiction, to use fiction for that. So if I have multiple themes going, then I have different stories that I can move to in the process of writing that help me get back to the challenging stuff when it's time.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think sometimes the fact of finding this topic depressing makes me more motivated to learn or write about it, because I guess ultimately I have a fairly optimistic orientation. So I think that if I find it depressing at a point in time, I can find my way to the other side of that. So I think just not shying away from those bad feelings that can sometimes come from something that could be overwhelming, but also finding community, writing about it and reaching out to others, then that helps it be less overwhelming or depressing for me.
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming, less depressing, and maybe more overwhelming is the feeling. And what I have really good access to is my anger. Anger really gets things done in my life. And so I hold on to that because it's our right. It's everybody's right to life, and it's not us not recycling or taking a bath that is doing harm, right? Like that there are, and to be really, I think, as Christine said before, is just to also develop literacies. And the more you know, the more you will find community and be moved to action. And things are not so bleak after all,
Yeah, because it's really policy that's going to change this, right? It's not recycling or organic cotton bags that are gonna get us out of this. It's policy changes for sure. Um, anyone else want to weigh in on that, or Simone? No. Okay. Okay. Oops, sorry, I just said the mark here. I was interested in this as well. I mean, Simone and Carrianne, both of you referenced many authors in your pieces, but Claire asked, what are your favorite authors who also write about climate change, and do you have a reading list of books that inspire you? Does everybody want to share someone they're interested in reading? Carleigh?
This is
or
sorry.
Simone, that's fine. Go ahead.
This is a new one for me. I have not, which I have not read yet, but I'm very excited about getting a copy of it. So, as a Caribbean-born writer, I'm gravitating towards the Caribbean again. And so, Diana Macaulay from Jamaica, she's an environmentalist and writer, has a new novel out called Daylight Come, and it's set in Jamaica 2084. And she's writing at a time when the land is too hot to work in the day, so everyone has to work at night. And where all animals are feral, and the sea has turned into sort of a plastic, cesspool. So it sounds not that fun as I'm describing it, but I'm excited to read it because I'm interested in looking at the small island Caribbean states in particular, and how we are opening our eyes to dealing with and addressing the situations that are happening sort of in these developing countries and further south than North America. I think it's going to be very important as we go forward.
Yeah, great, thank you. Carleigh.
Yeah, I won't say too much about him because I think we may get a chance to talk about him soon before the end of this. But Amitav Ghosh is I really like his work, and I like his nonfiction and his fiction work. I admit that I probably read more nonfiction than fiction as far as, like the heavy climate change issues. But I thought about this, and there are a lot of books where the climate plays a big role, basically. And Rebecca Roanhorse, Trail of Lightning, I really liked. N.K. Jemisin, of course. And Leslie Marmon Silko has a book called Ceremony, which is very intense and really good. I just read a great short story called Spider the Artist by Nnedi Okorafor, and you can check it out online in Lightspeed magazine if you'd like to. I'm not involved with Lightspeed. I'm not. You already said we could technically talk about our stuff we want, but I really liked it. Spider Artist by Nnedi Okorafor, and I do like Lauren Groff, who I think. Again, like just is using these elements. She reminds me a bit of Jeff Vandermeer, in that she just takes the fiction right into a weird fiction. And interestingly, they both live in Florida. It tends to be some sort of safe haven for people who don't mind writing about apocalyptic nature. So who would have guessed, I guess. Thank you, Florida, for that. But I do like Lauren Groff and her book of short stories, and Arcadia. And then, of course, T.C. Boyle for the absurdist, truly absurdist take on this stuff.
Thank you so much. Carrianne?
Could we also get a list?
I was thinking that what I'll do is I'll invite you to send me your list, and then I'll post it on the website. I was thinking that too. Yeah. Yeah, that would be
great. I honestly have avoided reading fiction about climate change and dystopic kind of, I find it was too much. It's been too much for me. I feel like I look forward to it now, though, because reading the anthology really was just so beautiful to see such a wide breadth approaches, and so I'm feeling more able now to go read more, and especially from authors from other places in the world, you know, who I think are experiencing climate change in much more intense ways, and the displacements. And I think that we would learn a lot from other ways of thinking about what is happening. And also because I wrote my book, and it's definitely about climate change, but it's really funny. And I'm really glad we're talking that humor is so important, because I thought, oh my God, maybe I'm pushing the envelope here by making it too funny, because this isn't a funny thing. But that's what I needed. That's what I've needed a lot in these days is humor. So yeah.
Laughing and crying are more similar than they are different.
Yes, absolutely.
Christine, do you have any recommendations?
Well, yeah, first of all, I've just been writing these recommendations down, so I'm happy that a list might be circulated.
Yes.
But, something kind of related to what Carrianne was saying about thinking in new ways for myself as a person of a white settler kind of background. I find I've been really inspired by storytelling that has taken place at events facilitated by Indigenous facilitators. And for example, there are sometimes stories that can be shared about past experiences of climate change. So Indigenous peoples have been in this place so long that they were actually here last time there was a major climatic change, so thousands of years ago. And I think there's so much to be learned from that. And also about sustainable food systems, which are so important also for addressing the climate crisis, as well as hunger and food sovereignty. So yeah, I think that maybe I just make a little plug for, books are amazing. I love books. But I think also kind of when it's possible, getting out of the house or finding a way to join on Zoom and making the effort to actually go to events where oral storytelling is taking place, and just valuing that knowledge that is around us if we're willing to make the effort.
Yeah. Thank you. That's wonderful. I think, Carleigh, since you mentioned Amitav Ghosh, I thought I would read a quote from 2016, and I think we'll kind of end on people's response and everyone's response to it. So in The Great Derangement that Carleigh referenced, the Amitav Ghosh said that this is me paraphrasing it, one of the biggest challenges of our time, climate change, the biggest challenge of our time, is ignored in mainstream literature. And I think he's not saying that people don't write about it. I mean, we just produced an anthology, lots of people are writing about it. But given how dire and the situation that we're in, why is it not making its way into the literary and the arts the way he thinks it should, given what a crisis we're in? He wrote this in 2016. I think it also needs to be asked, what is it about climate change that mention of it should lead to banishment from the preserves of serious fiction? What does this tell us about the culture writ large and its patterns of evasion? In a substantially altered world, when sea level rise has swallowed the Sunderbans and made cities such as Kolkata, New York, and Bangkok uninhabitable, when readers and museum goers turn to the art and literature of our time, will they not look first and most urgently for traces and portents of the altered world of their inheritance? And when they fail to find them, what can they do other than to conclude that ours was a time when most forms of art and literature were drawn into the modes of concealment that prevented people from recognizing the realities of their plight? Quite possibly, then, this era, which so congratulates itself on self-awareness, will come to be known as the time of the Great Derangement. This was written as part of Ghosh's book, The Great Derangement, but also was Guardian excerpted in the Guardian. That was written in 2016. Any thoughts about that? Do you feel that anything has changed in the last 4 years since that indictment of the literary response, or more of the reception of literary works? I think his point is that people write about it, but it gets delegated into science fiction and not taken seriously as a literary form. Anyone want to jump in on this final question?
I love that you brought up Ghosh, Kathryn, and this and I love that you mentioned science fiction as well, because something that we haven't really talked about much in this panel is that climate change has been addressed heavily in science fiction, fantasy, genre fiction for years and years and years. So it's a very powerful genre to check out for folks that want to read about elements of climate change and eco-justice. But as Ghosh points out, genre fiction gets relegated to as if it's to the margins of literature, as if it's not real literature. And the idea is that we actually use literature to discuss the term, to discuss the writing that we do, and genre fiction as if, well, you know, it's not actually literature. But I've read this book so many times, and I feel like to read this book is to really take a look at the development of the novel. It's an interrogation of the development of the novel itself. And while Ghosh's study is not entirely confined to the novel as understood in Western normative terms, it's pretty focused in this area, and particularly the development of realist literature, which sort of concerns itself with the collection and presentation of these small, banal human tasks of existence that sort of come together under the curation of the author to create this greater thematic message. And Ghosh feels that extreme weather events seem like out of place, like too coincidental, or the product of like poorly executed authorial intervention, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And so even though in our actual reality today, these extreme weather events are occurring on like a weekly, sometimes daily basis. So I think Ghosh sees this failure. This is a failure of imagination on the part of writers who just aren't trying, and I guess I mean not genre writers, who aren't trying hard enough to engage with this issue and find a way to, shoehorn in the odd typhoon. And perhaps readers who aren't prepared to accept these events as believable. So, but to answer your question, I do think there has been a bit of a change on this front, because we all just discussed our writing in this form today, and I do read this. So I think there are writers, although Ghosh definitely holds novels accountable for their role in actually increasing the divide, the cognitive divide between humans and what's going on in the world. I think there has been a lot of work, and I largely credit writers of color, Indigenous writers, for being a big part of that.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for your thoughts on the book. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think for me, I was particularly, as I read through the piece in The Guardian, was particularly drawn to his comment on the climate crisis being a crisis of culture. And and he defined that culture as that which creates desires. And this goes back to what I was the point I was trying to make around the price of progress that many of us have participated in, sort of this act of acquiring things, the travel, looking for the paradise, so to speak, and that has gotten worse as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it has gotten better if you have to try to judge which way we're headed. Certainly in looking at some things have made it easier, sort of like the share economy. So you have the Airbnbs, and so you could like have this whole other world and life in one country, and have your sort of everyday life in another country. And so we just have more stuff, more things. So there's that side of it. But then his point about the use of and us stopping to think of weather events as no longer these magical, surreal things. I think I have begun to see in my own work how it has begun to show up. I'm working on a memoir that is focused on grief and loss, and there's a particular part of Port of Spain and Trinidad, the Eastra River, that features in that book, and a flood is used as a way to speak to the experience of seeing my mother's body in the funeral home. And so it's using these very real things that I have experienced and have happened, and putting them into the work. I don't know that it will work. Who knows if it ends up on the cutting room floor when it gets to the editor, but that is what I was writing towards. And so I think there are ways in which writers are beginning to pluck and put in things like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. Carrianne or Christine, do you have any thoughts on?
I think that I also read a lot of theory. So I'm a sociologist by training, not really a fiction writer. I feel like still a fraud about that. But the idea that David Theo Goldberg theorized a futureless future, and that is something that I think is a great fear and a great grief. And so as a fiction writer, when we think about the convention of fiction, something happens to lead us somewhere else. So for me, what does a futureless future look like? Right? So as I'm trying to figure that out, I'm trying to figure out back to what story can I tell? So I think that is something that may be holding me back. I can't speak for other fiction writers, but that's certainly something that I have really wrestled with. Because as we're thinking about climate change, it's this notion of deep instability. Like we're going to have to transform everything, our relationships, the definition of what a good life means, all of those things. And with all these things in flux, the container of a novel just doesn't seem adequate, right? And so I think that there are lots of challenges about that, but I think, as everybody else has said, it's happening though. I think we're all trying and we're all reaching. But nothing is fixed anymore, right? There's no fixed horizon. There's no fixed destination to write towards. And I think that that's a big challenge.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Christine, any thoughts on the quote or what anyone else has said?
I'm going to take a pass on this one. I have a lot of thoughts happening in my mind, but it's not going to be coherent. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your work. Was really excited to do this panel, and thanks to Coach House Books for publishing the book, and to Word on the Street for having us. And I have to do a little plug because Massey Books is hosting a Watch Your Head event next week, and I'll be posting all the details. I don't have it with me right now, but there's a Facebook event, and I'll be posting all the details on Instagram and then on watchyourhead.ca. So you can check it out. There's a lineup of readers, and it's going to be a great event too. So thanks so much to everyone, and bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathryn, Christine, Carrianne, Simone, and Carleigh for sharing your work and your thoughts with us on this important discussion. And thank you to everyone for tuning in from home. If you'd like to order Watch Your Head, you can do so online through Another Story Bookshop or Coach House Books, and you can learn more about Watch Your Head at watchyourhead.ca. If you enjoyed tonight's discussion, please give this video a like on YouTube so that more people will find it. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great events like this one. Our next event happening in February is Toronto in Love, a feature conversation with author Adam Bunch and gossip maven Lainey Louis. And you can find more details about that on our website at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca, where you can also support The Word on the Street if you feel like doing so with a donation. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great evening.